Okay. Now the creature, I'm going to bring it in. Okay, so this is the one that I'm talking about. It's called the Pinhead. You can create your own bust or your own pinhead creature. The reason I gave you this one, even though it's very, very simple, is because it sort of speaks to that thing that I mentioned before, that concept of, because it is an additive workflow. When you start adding things, if you start with a normal humanoid character, it's going to be very bulky. So that's why I call it the Pinhead, because it has a tiny head, very slender, narrow neck, and ultimately when you add stuff to it, it's going to look larger or bigger in volume. Okay, let me just bring in my references of what we're talking about. So right now we're going to start exploring shapes. And this is the step 2. So this is kind of like what I end up with after adding a bunch of objects to my Pinhead. So you see the Pinhead is that green polygroup here underneath. That is the whole point of this step, is just to start exploring shapes. Okay, and that's what we're going to be doing, just exploring shapes. All right, so I'm going to take this one and I'm going to enable symmetry as well. And I'm going to start with the head. Oh, by the way, one thing I should mention is if you want to create a creature that, again, you don't really know what you're creating, because this is the whole point of this exploration of shapes or discovery of creatures. If you have an idea in mind, like I want to create a creature, but this is going to be more like a wolf type of thing, or something that is a quadruped. Instead of using the Pinhead, what you can do is use the dog that comes with ZBrush and then just dynamesh it down to something really, really thin, and then work the same process that I'm going to show you, but in a different base mesh. But I think, for the sake of the demo, we're going to keep it simple. So I'm going to click and drag this like so. And as soon as you drag something, this is more about workflow tips now, because, the whole point of this step is just clicking and dragging different things. But I'm going to show you a couple of things in terms of the workflow. So the first one is that right now I have control over which ones I want to add. Also, as soon as I drag them in, everything else gets masked out. So I can bring in the gizmo and I can enable local symmetry so that it happens based on the volumes of each object. Let me just show you what that means. So if I want to scale this up, I can do this. But you see, it is doing it based on the center of the world. If I want to scale them based on the center of each object locally, I need to enable local symmetry. So that's just like some workflow tips. And the good thing about this, I don't want to do too much editing of myself. So I don't want to start saying, okay, this is a nice object that I can start moving and rotating and things like that, because that is not the point of this exercise. If you start to edit yourself before you finish with everything, then you might as well just start using something as reference and building it the normal way. The whole point of this is to focus on shapes, shape languages, or shapes language, silhouette, and an outline of the character that is interesting and readable. So we're going to discover basically shapes. So all I want to do is just like, if I need to rotate it so that it's not like too embedded or just, things like that. But I'm not going to edit myself too much. All right, so that's one thing. The other thing that I was mentioning is that right now we are kind of like having control and say, okay, now I'm going to use this one in here, and now I'm going to use this one in there, right? So I'm going to undo that. But I don't want to do that. This is actually like a cool sort of jaw. Interesting. I don't want to do that. I want to be more random. I want to push this whole idea of discovery process to the limit. Right now, I just want to really emphasize this so that it's very clear. This step of the process is not about designing. It's not about trying to recreate something that when you create, when you add an object, you're like, okay, this looks like a rhinoceros. I'm going to do that. This is not the point for that, because that requires a much more conscious approach to the tweaking of the shapes. Right now, it's more about discovery. It's like figuring things out and having fun of adding these bits and pieces. We're going to be doing a little bit of filtering in just a second and editing. So to really push that, what we can do is go to the brush palette. You can basically make this a randomized way of adding things, or you can randomize your kit. So you can do that from the modifiers in here. There's a couple of ways of doing it. This thing, if you hover over, it tells you these three select. You can select the objects based on this. So it's the same thing as clicking. So you see, as I click on these different objects, it's just changing that mesh. But you can also change this multi-selector. So this multi-selector, if I think if you set it to 1, it should tell you anyway. Where is it? There's a way of, yeah. So if you set it to 0, it's going to be static. So meaning you can select like what I'm doing right now. If you set it to 1, it's going to cycle forward. So in my IMM viewer, it's going to go down. If you set it to 2, it's going to cycle backwards. Or if you set it to 3, it's going to be random. So if I press 3, now this is random. So even though I have this selected, I can click and drag. And every time that I drag a new one, it's going to be completely random ease that is selecting, right? So that is what I'm aiming for. All right, so it's all about just changing this slider to 3. That's what I'm saying. It's pretty easy to randomize it. And that's it. You can save 2 brushes. So go to the brush, to the brush palette and save this as 1. So you have your randomized one, and then you have another one without this. That is your more controlled version in case you want to have more control of it. And that's why in the resources that I share, you have 2. One is control one, and the other one is randomize or discovery. Alrighty, so now I'm going to go ahead and turn on my polyframe like so. And I'm just going to continue adding these shapes. Again, the whole point, forgot I'm actually already in randomize. So I'm going to click and drag and say, okay, this kind of like doesn't work. So undo that, try a different one. That's a better one. Click and drag. You know, it's just giving me different options. But the point here is that what I'm trying to do is maintain the silhouette not too crazy, because I can keep adding this and then this and then this and then this. And that sort of like creates this really weird looking thing that is going to make it a little bit harder to design after. So try to maintain things within the base mesh. And you can take the pinhead before you start adding meshes and distort it a bit to create something more toward what you want to design, I guess. But yeah, the whole point is just to keep things simple. So what I'm doing here, I don't know what I'm getting. So I'm just dragging. And if I find value in that shape, I'll leave it. If not, I'll just click and undo that. This one might be a cool one for the eyes. I don't know. It's kind of like a very suggestive one. Let's do something here for the body. The body is kind of tricky. I rather have just a few things that are interesting for the body, but focus more on the head, because then the rest of the body is kind of like an extension of what the head design would look like. So don't go too crazy with the heads. With the body stuff. I think it's important to highlight that. This could be already some pictorial pieces. Again, I'm trying not to edit myself too much, but you know, when I find pieces that I think, okay, this could work for something, I'll just add it in there. Okay. One more tip that I'm going to give you for this workflow. Well, actually 2 tips. One is more practical and the other one is more kind of like conceptual, I suppose. So the first one is that if you're doing this and you're thinking, this is rubbish, this is not going anywhere, like I'm just making a mess, just stick to the process. Believe me, I know that what I have here is not good, is chaos. That is the whole point. And then when we simplify things a bit and really design this creature, things are going to start making a lot more sense. So just stick to the process. Try to, again, add a few pieces that are like large pieces rather than doing this. Just like, don't do this. Don't add like tiny bits and pieces. That's for later. That's more like a detail. So just try to make larger pieces like that. Oh, that's kind of like a cool beak. That's not bad. I'm just gonna. I'm kind of torn. I'm gonna leave it. If anything, I remove it. So yeah, just make sure that you add the pieces that are large, okay? And just stick to the process. I promise that if you follow these steps, I've tested these, and the process of designing is going to solve this problem that we're creating for ourselves. We're creating a problem, and that's the more problematic, the harder it's going to be to solve it. But ultimately, we're creating a problem. The other tip is that you can actually, in your modifier keys, let's say in the shift key of ZBrush, you can add any brush that you want. So this is something that I found really interesting. I'm going to press the Shift key to access my smooth brush. It's just the normal smooth brush. But I'm going to press Shift. I'm going to click on the brush, and I'm going to select the Move Elastic, this one right here. Okay, so I'm going to click on Move Elastic while I'm holding the Shift key. All right, so now when I press Shift key, instead of having the smooth brush, I'm getting the elastic. So this is pretty cool because I have my normal IMM brush here that I can just go ahead and click and drag, right? I can bring in my gizmo and all of that. But because everything else is masked out, I can press Shift really quickly and then just push these shapes around, right? And then just do a little bit of tweaking. So push this in, move it down, click and drag, move it down. Sometimes it's just a matter of like pushing them in because they're a little bit too crazy. And I chose you can use any brush really. I chose the elastic brush because I have less control. And again, the whole point of this is to create chaos. So yeah, that's why I'm using the smooth brush, replacing the smooth brush with this. All right, I'm starting to see something. So I'm going to try to stop editing myself because I can already see some ideas. Okay, so that was just another tip, another workflow tip that you can put anything you want. If you want to have slightly more control, you can select something like the Move brush, and that gives you slightly more control over the shapes. Just holding Shift. Just kind of like getting used to the idea that in the Shift brush you now have something else. But I'm going to reset this back to my smooth brush. All right. And let's say that I'm happy with this. I will encourage you to, try this. And the cool thing about this whole process is that you can have multiple pieces or multiple subtools with different things. So you can, load up the Pinhead and do a couple more variations of this and see if you get something else. So just for the sake of them, I'm going to do that really, really quickly. All right, so I have another one, right? So I have two pieces or two creatures that I can play around with. But once I cover the steps, you see how easy it is to get to this point in just a few seconds. So you can do multiple pieces, multiple, let's say, chaos or multiple of these abstract shapes before you commit to anything. And the cool thing about this is that you might see completely different things from one to another. So in this one, I kind of see like a bird type of thing, like a weird, creature with a beak. Whereas this one is more like a totem type of thing. Maybe it needs something else for the head. I don't know. I just see different things on each creature. So I would encourage you to just try that, like load up the Pinhead and do multiple versions of this. That is kind of like the iterative process in this section of the workshop. So you can create multiple ones. But we're going to now move to the next set of steps, and I'm going to show you some important things. And I guess I'm going to show you the workflow, the things that I would do, the things that I will look for. This is what we're doing right now. We're just generating this type of thing. So this is exactly what I have here. If I turn on polyframe, this is exactly what we have here. Okay. The next step is the problem solving. Okay. So I'm just going to talk about this a little bit more while I'm doing it. Because it is just like setting things up. So we're still within the setup process. We're still thinking about how to solve that problem that we created for ourselves. But tomorrow we're going to spend a bit more time refining that and making sure that the design is readable. So a couple of things to keep in mind. I want to show you the alternative version of this in Modeler. So this is the creature that I just showed you before. This one right here. So this is already the finished sort of creature with the render and everything and details, but this is how it started. And all of these pieces that I put together are essentially objects that I created in that IMM or in the same thing that I did in Modeler. So I just put all of these things together and you see they're just a bunch of pieces rearranged. So you can actually use exactly the same process and the same workflow that I'm showing you in ZBrush, but in something like Modeler. So that's why I'm really excited about this technique, because you can use it in anything really. Now, the other one is this sort of like more mechanical stuff. So the main difference here is that instead of exploring shapes, you're more limited to using the objects that already have a predefined sort of shape. So all of the cylinders here and all of these, those are pre-made shapes that look kind of like hard surface, and then you just assemble it together. So this is more like the traditional Kitbashing technique, which you can totally do. But for the sake of this demo and what we're trying to create, which is more organic creatures and more original designs, this is the idea, right? So it is basically the same thing. Now, in terms of what we're going to do next, so the next step that I'm talking about, this problem solving, there are a few things that I'd like you to pay attention to. One thing really is the silhouettes. So this is what I had before in my, actually, I'm going to bring in my original concepts. Okay, so this is how that creature started. So this is the silhouette of this creature. Let's put it here on the side. This is the silhouette of that creature. It's exactly the same thing that I have, let's say here or here. This is the same thing, right? They're like a little bit closer together because I had a bit more time just sort of like making sure that the things that I created wasn't like sticking out too much. But you can create the same thing with the IMM brush that I shared. Now, the important thing is I'm going to go to the base refine, which is this bit, right? And you'll see that the silhouette is way different, or not way different, but it's a lot more refined. So what I want to talk about is that that silhouette. So this is the front view and this is the side view. So what you can see is, hopefully you can see it, is the left one is obviously very bumpy, very chaotic, and then the one on the right hand side, it has a bit more intentionality. The design is kind of like starting to take form. We are problem solving that chaos that we had on the left hand side with something that it's a bit more cohesive. So when I talk about refining the design, I know there could be a very vague questions, or if you say if you ask me how do you go from this left hand side to the right hand side, and I just say, oh, you just refine the design and you think about the shapes of the the shape language and all of that, that's still, it is useful, but it's a very vague answer. So practically what you look for are contrast and readability. So, and proportions. Proportion is like huge thing, but to me, proportions fit within balancing the design. So you see here on the left hand side, this line is very bumpy and is very straight. So you have like a triangular shape with bunch of pieces at the top and a triangular shape at the bottom with bunch of pieces and a singular sort of tube with a jagged line, right? Whereas on the right hand side, you have much more of a design. So you have these concave and convex curves going through. So convex, concave, then you have a little bit of a shorter neck, or like it reads like a shorter neck. Then you have this nice smooth transition towards the shoulders of the creature. Same thing here at the on the side. You have a much more pronounced sort of shape. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is, like, if you look at the let's say the distance of the top of the head and the front of the face are similar, are very, very close to each other. And if you want to add contrast, if you want to make things look very interesting, what you can do is exaggerate the ratios of things and the proportions or the placement. So it is very boring to have, let's say, two spheres that are exactly the same. I mean, it works for eyes, but in other shapes, if you want to have one that is really big and another one that is kind of like on the side, that makes things a lot more interesting. So in this case, I have a larger sort of cranium piece, right? That is smoother, let's say, than the rest. And then you have like a tiny compressed sort of front of the head and jaw that looks a little bit more jagged. So this is the importance of the next step that we're going to be doing, that try to look for the readability of the character, the silhouette, the proportion, the shapes.